Well, it's a season of firsts in the NCAA as UCLA won their very first national championship on the women's side in Phoenix. Meanwhile, the UConn men can win their third title in 4 seasons with a win on Monday night, whereas Michigan looks to be the first Big Ten team since Tom Izzo's Michigan State team won the title in 2000. So let's go to Indianapolis and join front office sports reporter Amanda Christovich for a preview of all the big stuff. Amanda, good to see you as always. Before we get to the men's side, which of course is where I know you're at in Indianapolis, it was a
Okay.
really big moment in the women's side. As I mentioned, UCLA winning for the first time on the women's side, the first time since the men won it in 1995, which is incredible. And this was against a team that a lot of people thought South Carolina, after their win against UConn, probably were the favorites here.
100%. The obviously what stuck out to me, and I think what stuck out to everybody, was just how dominant this UCLA program looked against South Carolina. I don't know that anybody, maybe outside of the UCLA players and Coach Corey Close in the locker room, thought that, even if they did win, they were going to make such a statement. And they came out quickly. They made that statement, I think, within the first quarter. I was kind of running back and forth between press conferences here in Indy and trying to keep up with the game on TV. But if I remember correctly, they jumped out to a very healthy lead early on, and obviously that lead only grew. And as you said, yes, history for the program. Also, just a really great storyline of several seniors on the team who have been pushing for this national championship. They were obviously disappointed in the Final Four last year, and they came back a year later with a vengeance.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those seniors because I think, and we'll talk obviously about the transfer portal here in just a moment, but the
Mhm.
fact that except for just a couple of players, most of these players had stayed within UCLA all 4 years. Is this sort of a template in this modern transfer portal era that we're living in that you still can win even if you're not flipping new players every single year?
Yeah, I think the dynamics in men's and women's basketball might be a little bit different, but I think on the women's side, especially because there's no one and done rule for the women. So the whereas on the men's side, rosters in general are getting older and older and older. On the women's side, they've sort of leaned on seniors always. But it is certainly notable that for UCLA, there are so many seniors, so many players who returned. I think it speaks to UCLA's resources. It speaks to Corey Close's leadership. And I think it also speaks to whether you use the transfer portal or not, experience continues to be a dominant factor in winning a championship. And that's true on the men's and the women's side, that there's just something about the age and the experience of these older players who have been in these situations and in many cases lost, right? That they can come back a year or 2 later and win and really sort of guide their younger players off the bench or younger starters and help them handle the pressure of these big moments.
Yeah, and I think one of the more interesting stats, of course, everybody was transfixed on the altercation between Don Staley and Gino Auriemma.
Mhm.
Don Staley just one national championship away from joining Gino Auriemma, Pat Summitt, and Kim Mulkey, who all at least have 4 titles. She'll have to try again next year. Let's move to Indianapolis, of course, where you are at right now, where this is going to be a really fascinating matchup between the number one seed Michigan, as I mentioned, trying to become the first Big Ten team since Michigan State to win the national title. But they're going up against a UConn team that you've written about that really have sort of become this monster in the NIL era right now.
UConn is such an interesting story, and maybe it's because I'm biased. I quote unquote grew up in the Big East as a Georgetown alum, but UConn was an absolute juggernaut when they won their championships in 2023 and 2024. They steamrolled through the tournament, and I believe, if I remember correctly, Dan Hurley used that specific word at one point during the tournament. It's all kind of a blur to me now. Um, Talked about, this weekend here in Indianapolis, that this is not, quote, a joyride for UConn. This team is an incredible program, but they have been battling every single game, right? Like we've all exhausted conversations about Braylon Mullins' shot that sent them to the Final Four in the first place against a Duke program that they were obviously, the big underdogs there. They were sort of a very small underdog against Illinois, despite beating them earlier in the season. They battled and they won that game too. And so they're going to be facing this powerhouse Michigan program, heavy favorite. But in the NIL era, in the transfer portal era, they might be the first men's basketball dynasty. And a lot of factors there, right? Like UConn is no stranger to winning. They have 6 national championships throughout the years, starting in the 90s, I believe. But the way that Dan Hurley has been able to create this, as he said, an identity for the program, and build, sort of supplement players in the portal, but really build on some of the younger players that have stayed. Like I wrote about redshirt senior Alex Caravan. He could make history in his own right, after 5 years at UConn, 4 years playing. And it's just an incredible story when it's so difficult and I would argue more difficult than ever to repeat titles when there's a system of unrestricted free agency.
Yeah, and also on top of that, you've got two assistant coaches on both sides, being
Mhm.
Luke Murray and Justin Joyner, who are, this is their last game for this team, for both of these teams at the same
Yes.
time.
It's incredible because it's difficult enough to be a coach that is trying to get your program to win a national championship, right? I mean, pressure aside, these are often very quick turnaround tournaments and where, between the final four and the national championship game, you've got 24 hours to scout your opponent. Dan Hurley called it like cramming for a test. So it's really this incredibly cumbersome job, especially on the assistants who are, focusing on this scouting. And in addition to that, these two assistants, Luke Murray and Justin Joyner on UConn and Michigan respectively, are also going to be head coaches and they've already taken their head coaching positions at other schools. And they have to do that because of the transfer portal. The transfer portal opens for the men the Tuesday after the national championship. So they basically couldn't wait. They had to already start building their rosters at their next job while they're still here in Indianapolis trying to win a national championship.
I mean, right now, Michigan is about a 6.5 point favorite right now. Is that the expectation and what you're hearing there? Like that Michigan is indeed the favorite, even though they're going up against this juggernaut that's UConn?
100% they're the favorite, like, no question. I was chatting with a couple other reporters, yesterday, and we were all they were sort of saying even Dan Hurley was kinda talking as if Michigan was the favorite. He's always like, "Look, we don't take on the underdog narrative, like, we've won 2 national championships in the last, 4 years, like, we're not underdogs per se, but they certainly are not the favorites to win this game, not at all." And so I think, I would never count out the Yukon Huskies, especially the way that they're playing in this tournament. They're finding ways to win, but Michigan is absolutely the powerhouse here. They have been all season, and we'll have to see how these two programs can match up tonight. I am so excited. So everyone drink your coffee and get ready for the 8:50 p.m. tip off. And in
I I was just about to ask you about that because, look, I'm turning into an old man all the time, but why is this game at 8:50 at night? This just seems so late.
So this happens every year, at the men's national championship. It's not only on a Monday night, but the tip-off is usually between 8:30 and 9 PM Eastern. Sometimes it's not so bad for us on the ground because, like, last year we were in San Antonio, so it was an earlier time zone, but we're in the Eastern time zone, so we're all griping about it, right? Because, there's no pregame media availability for the, general sort of population of reporters. There might be for some of the network covering, the event, CBS, but and TNT. But for us, like, we're all just kind of, like, waiting around, like, "Okay, what is it?" When is this tip off? Like, I was just texting my colleagues Alex Schiffer and Jeremy O'Brien at Front Office Sports. When are we gonna head to the stadium, guys? Like, tip offs at 8:50 p.m. The answer to your question, I think, is prime time ratings perspective, right? Because on the West Coast, that's a 5:50 p.m. tip off. Anything earlier could break into the sort of 9 to 5 workday for the West Coast. But yeah, for us East Coasters, it's rough. And just like sort of some inside baseball for you, as reporters, like the when the game ends, that's almost like the beginning of our night because
True, because you got to write everything, you got to put everything together. Yeah,
right, but it's like we have the trophy ceremony,
right.
right?
Press conferences.
Then we have the cutting down of the nets, right? A very religious experience, and an annual tradition here. And, and doing reporting while all of that is happening. Then we have post-game press conferences. Then we have locker room availability. Then we all sit down and actually figure out how to write and put all of this together, right? So it's a very long night for the reporters and the editors and the social media and multimedia folks on the ground. But honestly, like, where else are we gonna be? It's one of my favorites of the year. So and everybody, all the readers and the viewers at home can go to sleep and wake up to all the content the next morning.
You mentioned earlier we were talking about the transfer portal. Obviously, that starts immediately after that this game is over. Let's talk a little bit about that and sort of like how the transfer portal is going to be working for this upcoming basketball season. And I ask that because I know the president had just issued an executive order directed at the transfer portal.
Yes, so that was also from an inside baseball perspective very fun because on Friday afternoon, early evening, President Trump issued a sweeping executive order to govern college sports. So all of us in Indianapolis were having a very fun time pulling double duty there. Um, One of the most notable things in that executive order, as you mentioned, was an attempt to legislate the transfer portal. What President Trump wrote in that executive order was that he wants the NCAA to implement a rule that basically goes back to the one-time transfer portal. Players can trade one time without penalty. And then there's an opportunity to transfer again one other time after you've gotten your 4-year degree, right? So if you want to do a graduate year, you can do that. And there's a 5-year limit on eligibility. Now, there was a lot of, confusion when that executive order first came out because the first question was, well, is this effective immediately? The answer to that is no. The executive order said it would go into effect until August 1st, so it would not impact this transfer portal. But the second question is, this is a rule, well, the 5-year rule aside, right? Like the one-time transfer rule is a rule the NCAA had and then literally got sued and was full. I asked NCAA President Charlie Baker, who was in Indianapolis on Saturday, like, are you guys even able to change this rule back? Like an executive order directs you to, but like, can you and can you know, be protected from litigation? And it kind of seems like the answer to that is no. So I don't think that this executive order is actually going to change anything. I think what Charlie Baker said was the positive of it was that it shows momentum in in Washington and gives Congress a blueprint for what the big issues are in college sports that need to be legislated. But, Charlie Baker said, "Look, I was a governor. Sometimes you write executive orders to actually, direct agencies to do things. Sometimes you write executive orders because you want to give your legislative body a sense of what they should be legislating on." So I think that's more what this EO was.
A great context, and thank you so much for sort of extrapolating on all of that, because I think a lot of us when we first saw that news, I'm sure even us and the players were all confused, being like, okay,
Yeah,
one transfer, how is this going to work when
right.
you have players who have done multiple transfers over the course of their entire collegiate careers?
Exactly, exactly. So I think the TLDR for any coach or player is to I mean, look, it would even if this executive order is enforceable, it doesn't take effect for the either men's or women's basketball transfer portal windows anyway. So business as usual. We'll have to see for football, but I really don't see this executive order being necessarily legally enforceable, or at least the lawyers that I've spoken with don't think it will be. So unless we sort of get Congress to pass an actual law in between now and then, I think the unrestricted transfer portal is going to continue the way that it has been.
We'll get you out of here on this, Amanda.
You-
Over or under 7 coffees before 8:50 for you?
Oh my gosh, if I had 7 coffees, I
You being a restrained, like restrained.
I would need to be I would be in the hospital, because I have the higher end of blood pressure as it
Okay,
is.
so under.
So this is my first of the day,
Okay.
iced coffee, grande iced coffee from Starbucks. I'll definitely get a second one. Um, Espresso-based drinks has not been as readily available because no shade to Starbucks, but I don't think they do espresso drinks that
Yeah.
great. So I'm
Yeah.
sticking with the iced coffee. I'm gonna say 3,
Okay. Still not
right?
bad. And you know what? After this is all over tonight, maybe an espresso martini.
Oh, man.
Yes. You, Alex Schiffer, everybody.
Yes, the front office organization, is rolling through hard, and I just have to shout out both Jeremy and Alex, who
Yes.
all have
Killing
just
it.
a phenomenal job here, in Indianapolis. Not only is it really fun to have them, but, the breadth of coverage that I mean, anybody just don't miss one video, don't miss one
Nope.
story. All been great, and, they're fantastic, and we are all very much looking forward to tonight. So, thank you, and I'm gonna go get a second coffee.
You do that. Amanda, best of luck tonight. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.
And stay with Front Office Sports, everyone, for more in the business and culture of sports.